The day I stepped into my biological family's mansion for the first time, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might jump out of my chest. I had spent years imagining this moment, meeting the people who shared my blood, finally belonging somewhere that didn't feel temporary. But the fantasy lasted only a few seconds. My mother didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I had been all these years. Instead, she slid a sleek black bank card across the table toward me. Her voice was calm, almost distant. Every month, 1 million will be transferred to this card. You don't have to think of me as your mother. Just make sure that when people are watching, you behave like my son. Most people in that situation would probably feel their heart shatter. They'd throw the card back, accuse her of being cold, maybe storm out in tears. But me? My eyes practically lit up. Without hesitation, I dropped to my knees on the polished marble floor and bowed slightly. Understood, Mom, actually, boss. Just leave it to me. Her eyebrows tightened in confusion. Clearly, this wasn't the reaction she had expected. We didn't bring you back just for appearances, she continued. There's also a marriage arrangement. The woman you'll marry has complications. Let's just say she isn't exactly a desirable match. If anything, that made me even more enthusiastic. I stood up straight, clapping my hands once like someone who had just been assigned an important mission. A task this serious definitely deserves a bonus. That was the beginning of my new life in the Wang family. The mansion was massive, the kind of place where your footsteps echoed down hallways longer than some entire buildings. Everything felt expensive, spotless, and carefully controlled. Meanwhile, the first thing I did after receiving the card was pull out my phone. I typed in the numbers. Checked the balance. Refreshed the screen twice just to be sure. Still there. A grin started creeping across my face, and no matter how hard I tried to hide it, the corners of my mouth refused to stay down. My mother watched me with a faint frown. 1 million every month, she said again. All you have to do is behave properly in public. Don't embarrass the family. I immediately knelt again, this time even faster than before. Boss, don't worry. I'll perform perfectly. Stand up, she said sharply. And stop calling me that. Then after a short pause she added, you don't have to feel like my son, but you should still call me Mom. Of course, Mom, I replied without hesitation. I stood up quickly, though my knees were already aching from the hard floor. But honestly? For 12 million a year, a little knee pain was nothing. If she asked me to bark like a dog right there in the living room, I'd probably give the most enthusiastic performance anyone had ever heard. She leaned back against the sofa, crossing her arms as if preparing to explain something unpleasant. Let's be clear about one thing, she said. Your younger brother has been raised here his entire life. To the outside world, you are the older brother, but inside this house, he is my son. And he is the heir to this family. In other words, know your place. I straightened my posture immediately. Yes, Mom. Crystal clear. My name is George. My younger brother is Makoto. I even stood so straight that I looked like a soldier waiting for inspection. As long as the money arrives on time, I continued cheerfully, young Master Makoto will always be my respected big brother. I know exactly where I stand. Just then, footsteps echoed from the staircase. A young man slowly walked down from the second floor. That was Makoto. My biological brother. He stopped halfway down the stairs and looked me over from head to toe, his expression filled with undisguised disgust. So this is the long-lost brother, he muttered. What are you even wearing? That outfit looks awful. I glanced down at myself. Okay, he wasn't completely wrong. My clothes came from a roadside market stall. Cheap fabric, basic stitching. Nothing impressive. But hey, at least everything was still intact. In most stories, this would be the moment where the long-lost brother fights back with pride. Maybe delivers some sharp comeback that leaves everyone speechless. A clever exchange of words. A dramatic defense of dignity. But that kind of hero wasn't me. Not when the bank card in my pocket was still warm from being handed over. I instantly put on the most respectful smile I could manage, the same one I used years ago when convincing elderly people at the public square to buy miracle health supplements. Young master has excellent taste, I said sincerely. I grew up in the countryside. One day chasing pigs, the next day herding chickens. Of course my style is terrible. I rubbed the back of my head sheepishly. And about the whole older brother thing, that's only for outsiders. I bowed slightly toward him. From today onward, you're my big brother. Please take care of me. Yes. My surrender was flawless. Makoto stood there for a moment, completely stunned by the flood of praise I had just thrown at him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. It was clear he hadn't expected someone to surrender that quickly. I was just about to continue the performance, maybe add a few more compliments, really seal the deal, when my mother's voice cut through the room. That's enough. Since everyone understands their roles, let's eat. Just like that, the strange introduction ceremony came to an end. Lunch was exactly what you'd expect in a house this wealthy. The dining table looked less like a place for a meal and more like a high-end restaurant display. There were dishes I couldn't even name, fresh seafood, premium meats, delicately arranged vegetables, and desserts that probably cost more than a week of groceries back where I grew up. Naturally, I didn't hold back. With chopsticks in one hand and a bowl in the other, I dug in like someone who had just survived a famine. Right in the middle of my second helping, footsteps approached the dining room. A middle-aged man walked in while removing his coat. This was my biological father. He glanced at me briefly before sitting down. So this is the one who grew up in the countryside. His tone carried the kind of casual dismissal people use when talking about something unpleasant. When he noticed how quickly I was eating, his expression darkened. No table manners at all. I didn't bother responding. Anyone who has spent years grinding away at low-paying jobs knows something important. Part of your salary is basically payment for swallowing your pride. Compared to some of the things I had endured before, this kind of insult barely registered. He poured himself a glass of wine and took a few slow sips. Meanwhile, I kept eating. Lobster, steak, something that looked like imported shellfish. If it was on the table, it was going into my bowl. Eventually he couldn't ignore it anymore. "Look at you," he said sharply. "Now that you're back, you'd better learn the family rules. Don't go around embarrassing us." I calmly chewed a piece of lobster meat, rolled my eyes slightly, and continued eating as if I hadn't heard a thing. My silence seemed to convince him that I was intimidated. And that only made him bolder. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "Thinking about it," he said with a faint smirk, "this kid is actually pretty lucky. Lost for years, suddenly comes back, and just in time to handle that little problem for the family." He chuckled softly. "The Liu family really has terrible luck. Every generation worse than the last. That whole household is basically a disaster waiting to explode. If it weren't for the business ties between our families, no one would even bother dealing with them." Then he glanced at me again. A rough country boy paired with their situation, honestly, it fits perfectly. Like a lid made for the right pot. While he continued speaking in that mocking tone, I quietly picked up a piece of abalone and started thinking. What exactly was this man's issue with me? My mother setting strict boundaries, that made sense. She wanted to make sure I didn't start imagining myself as a real heir. My younger brother showing hostility, that was also understandable. From his perspective, I was a sudden threat to his position. But this man, this so-called father? We were practically strangers. If biology was the only connection between us, then technically speaking, our relationship was built on nothing more than a single microscopic moment many years ago. Yet he seemed unusually eager to humiliate me. As I thought about it, something clicked in my mind. Unlike the rest of the family, he didn't carry the same last name. My mother and my brother both belonged to the powerful Wang family. He, on the other hand, had married into it. Which meant something very interesting. In a household ruled by a strong wife and an heir who carried her family name, this man's position might not be as secure as he liked to pretend. "Did the pigs finally get tired of you and send you here?" Her words were sharp, but her tone sounded almost bored, like she had already decided what kind of person I was before I even walked through the door. The room around her was chaotic. Music pounded through the speakers so loudly that the floor vibrated slightly under my feet. Colored lights flashed across the walls, turning the strange costumes around the room into something even more bizarre. Wings, horns, tails, half the people here looked like characters from some fantasy convention that had gone completely off the rails. And in the middle of it all sat Willow, the so-called eldest daughter of the Liu family. My future fiancée. She leaned back lazily against the sofa, one arm draped across the backrest, a cigarette held between two fingers. Her hair was a wild mix of bright colors, and her clothes were styled like a rebellious rock star rather than the daughter of a powerful business family. If someone had told me she was a celebrity troublemaker instead of a wealthy heiress, I would have believed them instantly. I looked around the room once, calmly taking in the strange crowd. Then I smiled. "Yes," I said cheerfully. "The pigs and I had creative differences." A few people nearby burst into laughter. Willow raised an eyebrow slightly. She probably hadn't expected me to respond like that. Most people in my situation would either get angry or shrink back in embarrassment. But anger doesn't pay monthly salaries. And embarrassment definitely doesn't come with 30 million in advance. So why would I care? I walked over and pulled a chair closer to the sofa, sitting down across from her. "My name is George," I said casually. "But you probably already know that." She exhaled a thin stream of smoke and studied me carefully. "Of course I know," she replied. "You're the substitute groom they sent over. Straight to the point. No politeness, no pretending. Honestly, I appreciated that." I leaned back slightly in my chair. Well, I said with a relaxed shrug, you're not wrong. The people around us quieted down a little, clearly interested in the conversation. Everyone here probably knew about this marriage arrangement. In families like ours, gossip travels faster than the internet. Willow tapped ash into a nearby tray. So tell me something, she said. Did they explain my reputation to you before sending you here? Her tone carried a hint of challenge. I nodded. Of course. And you still came, she asked. Of course. This time she actually laughed. A short, amused sound. You're either very brave or very stupid. Neither, I replied calmly. I'm just very practical. That answer made her pause. The cigarette stopped halfway to her lips as she looked at me more carefully. I continued speaking. From what I understand, both our families want this marriage for business reasons. That means neither of us really has a choice. I gestured casually around the noisy room. So whether you spend your nights here with dragons and demons, a few cosplayers nearby cheered at that description, or whether I spend my days pretending to be the perfect son-in-law. I shrugged again. At the end of the day, the contract still stands. For the first time since I walked in, Willow's expression changed slightly. Not angry. Not amused. Interested. She leaned forward a little, studying my face as if trying to figure out what kind of person I actually was. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. So you really don't care what kind of woman I am? I smiled. Honestly? She nodded once. I rested my elbows on my knees and answered calmly. I'm not here for love. The room went silent. Even the music suddenly seemed less important. Willow stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. And I finished my sentence with a perfectly relaxed grin. I'm here for the paycheck. Couple just now was clearly outside my normal job description. So if you could transfer the reward directly, that would be the most convenient. For a moment the room went completely silent. Then Willow burst out laughing. Not the polite kind of laugh people use in social situations, but the genuine kind, the kind that bends your shoulders forward and makes it hard to breathe. You're unbelievable, she said, wiping the corner of her eye. I've met greedy people before, but you might be the most honest one. I lowered the phone slightly but kept the QR code visible. Honesty is a professional virtue, I replied calmly. Especially when money is involved. She leaned back on the sofa again, studying me with curiosity. Let me get this straight, she said slowly. You stood up to those two just now, not because you felt bad for me. Of course not. Not because you wanted to impress me. Definitely not. Then why? I tilted my head slightly. Because protecting my employer's dignity helps maintain a stable working environment. She blinked once. Employer? I corrected myself immediately. Sorry. Fiancé. That only made her laugh again. You're really treating this marriage like a job. I spread my hands. Isn't it? For a moment she didn't answer. Instead she stared at me quietly, as if trying to see through whatever mask I might be wearing. But the truth was simple. I didn't bother pretending to be noble. I didn't pretend to be romantic. And I definitely wasn't here to play the role of some tragic hero. Finally she spoke again. You know, she said thoughtfully, most men who meet me try to impress me. I'm not most men. They brag about their money, their connections, their status. I don't have any of those. They pretend to care about my feelings. I'm terrible at pretending. Her eyes narrowed slightly. So the only thing you care about is money. I thought about it for a second. Then nodded honestly. At the moment, yes. Instead of looking offended, Willow seemed amused. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. A second later my own phone vibrated. I looked down. A transfer notification. 500,000. I immediately straightened my posture and gave a respectful nod. Thank you for the bonus. You're welcome, she replied lazily. Then she crossed one leg over the other and looked at me again. You're interesting, George. Interesting is good for business. Tell me something, she said. If one day the Wang family stops paying you, would you still stay here? That question was sharp. Almost like a test. But I didn't hesitate. If the salary stops, I said calmly, then the contract ends. Just like that? Just like that. She stared at me for several seconds. Then suddenly she smiled. A slow, complicated smile. You might be the strangest man I've ever met. I shrugged. I've been called worse. The room had grown quiet again. The music outside the private room still thumped faintly through the walls, but inside it felt almost calm. After a moment Willow spoke again. All right, employee. I raised an eyebrow. Yes, boss? She chuckled softly. If you're going to be my fiancé from now on, there's one rule. And what's that? Her gaze locked onto mine. You're not allowed to betray me. The request sounded simple. But the way she said it made it feel heavier than it should have been. I thought about it for a moment. Then I nodded seriously. That's fair. She seemed surprised by how quickly I agreed. You didn't even ask why. No need. Why not? I gave a small smile. Because loyalty is also included in the service package. She stared at me again. And for the first time that night, the amusement in her eyes softened just a little. Are you nervous? I glanced around the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like upside-down galaxies. The floor reflected the light so perfectly that it almost looked like we were walking across water. Everywhere I looked there were people in tailored suits and glittering dresses, all holding glasses of expensive drinks and speaking in voices that sounded practiced and polite. In short, it was exactly the kind of place where someone like me absolutely didn't belong. But nervous? Not really. I adjusted my cuffs and smiled slightly. Miss Liu, I've chased pigs across muddy fields and negotiated vegetable prices with stubborn farmers at 6 in the morning. Compared to that, smiling and drinking in a room full of rich people is practically a vacation. Willow glanced at me sideways. You're not worried about embarrassing me? If I embarrass you, my bonus might get reduced, I said seriously. So don't worry. I'll behave very professionally tonight. She rolled her eyes but didn't say anything else. Together we walked into the center of the hall. Almost immediately, several pairs of eyes turned toward us. Some curious, some surprised, and some clearly hostile. News travels quickly in circles like this. By now most of the guests probably knew that the Liu family's rebellious daughter had suddenly agreed to a marriage alliance with the Wang family, and that the groom was a mysterious man who had appeared out of nowhere. Which meant one thing. Everyone wanted to see what kind of person I was. A middle-aged man approached first, smiling politely. Miss Liu, it's been a while. Willow nodded slightly. Mr. Chen. His gaze shifted toward me. And this must be my fiancé, Willow said calmly. For a brief moment the man's smile froze. Clearly he had heard rumors, but hearing it confirmed was still surprising. I immediately stepped forward and extended my hand. Nice to meet you, George. He shook my hand out of basic courtesy, though the confusion in his eyes was impossible to hide. After a few polite words he excused himself and walked away. Willow leaned closer and whispered quietly. You handled that well. I told you, I murmured back. Professional service. More guests approached. Some offered congratulations. Some asked indirect questions. A few simply stared at me as if trying to figure out how someone like me had suddenly appeared beside Willow Liu. I responded to every greeting with the same calm smile. Friendly. Polite. But completely unbothered. After all, none of these people were paying my salary. Eventually Willow guided me toward the balcony for a moment of fresh air. The noise of the party faded behind us. She leaned against the railing and looked at me thoughtfully. You're adapting pretty quickly, she said. I'm a fast learner. You don't look like someone who grew up in the countryside. That's because you didn't see me 10 minutes ago while those stylists were torturing me with hairspray. She laughed quietly. Then her expression softened slightly. You know, most people here are trying very hard to impress someone. Of course they are. But you're not. That's because I already have the best deal in the room, I replied. Her eyebrow lifted. What deal? I tapped the inside of my jacket pocket where my phone was resting. A contract with excellent payment terms. She stared at me for a second before shaking her head. You really are impossible. Just as she said that, the large doors of the banquet hall opened again. Several important-looking guests entered, immediately attracting attention from everyone nearby. Willow's expression changed slightly when she saw them. I followed her gaze. Important people? I asked. She nodded faintly. Very. Then she glanced at me again, her voice lowering just a little. George, tonight might get complicated. I smiled calmly. Complicated situations usually come with extra pay. For a moment she looked like she was trying very hard not to laugh. And then the two of us stepped back into the bright lights of the party together. 1 month later, Willow and I got married. Calling it a wedding might be giving it too much credit. The ceremony was extremely simple, almost symbolic. There were no extravagant decorations, no media coverage, and certainly no fairy tale atmosphere. Just a small gathering of relatives and a few business associates from the Liu and Wang families. Which made sense. A rebellious heiress with a questionable reputation, and a countryside son-in-law who had appeared out of nowhere. Neither of us were exactly the kind of couple people wrote romantic stories about. But Willow didn't care. And I definitely didn't care. So the whole thing passed quietly, like signing a contract. The only detail worth mentioning was the wedding night. We slept in separate rooms. Completely separate. Which, in my opinion, was perfectly reasonable. After all, I wasn't here to play the role of a loving husband. I was here to do a job. A very well-paid job. As long as I remembered that clearly, life would remain simple. Days passed, and I gradually settled into my new routine. During the day, I accompanied Willow to meetings, dinners, and business events. At night, I went home, checked my bank balance like a responsible employee, and slept peacefully knowing my salary was still on schedule. Honestly, it was a very comfortable life. But just when things started feeling stable, trouble arrived from the Wang family. One afternoon, while I was relaxing at home scrolling through financial news, my phone suddenly started vibrating non-stop. One message after another appeared in the family group chat. At first I ignored it. Family chats are dangerous places. 90% of the time it's either pointless arguments or people forwarding strange motivational quotes. But when the notifications kept piling up, curiosity finally won. I opened the chat, and immediately understood why everyone was panicking. Apparently, my father Simon and my younger brother Makoto had gotten themselves involved in a major investment project, one that had just collapsed spectacularly. The losses were enormous. So enormous that even the Wang family couldn't ignore it. Which meant only one thing. Someone was about to get blamed. And judging by the tone of the messages, that storm was already starting to form. After the wedding, life seemed to settle into a quiet routine. But calm rarely lasts long in wealthy families. One day news exploded inside the Wang family. My father Simon and my younger brother Makoto had joined forces and poured an enormous portion of the Wang family's available funds into what they called a revolutionary technology project. The result? The people behind the project vanished overnight. Money gone? No trace. At the same time, several major projects under the Wang Group reached critical settlement deadlines. Without the expected funds returning, the entire financial chain collapsed instantly. The Wang family's cash flow was wiped out. That evening the three members of the Wang family appeared together in the living room of the Liu family's villa. Simon looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. Makoto sat quietly with his head lowered, trying his best to stay invisible. Even my mother Rosie, who usually carried herself with absolute control, looked unusually tense. Simon didn't even glance in my direction. Instead he turned toward Willow with a strained smile. Willow, this time I made a mistake and suffered a loss. The Liu family currently has strong liquidity. Since you're the eldest daughter of the Liu family, perhaps you could invest 1 billion to stabilize the Wang family. Willow calmly took a sip of tea. Then she glanced at me. For something this important, she said lightly, I should hear George's opinion. After all, he's my husband. Very clever. She tossed the problem straight into my hands. 3 pairs of eyes immediately locked onto me. Well, since the ball had been passed, I had to play it. We won't invest. The room fell silent. Simon stared at me. What did you say? I said we won't invest. I took another calm sip of tea. In the entire Wang family, I continued, aside from my mother, you and Makoto are both financial black holes. Willow's money is part of our shared assets now. Using our money to fill a hole you dug yourselves. I shook my head. I don't agree. Simon slammed the table. You ungrateful brat? If the Wang family hadn't brought you back, you'd still be feeding pigs somewhere. That's not relevant, I replied calmly. You know exactly why you brought me back in the first place. You paid me, and I completed the task. I leaned forward slightly. Now you want Willow to clean up your disaster? Keep dreaming. For a moment the room felt heavy. Then my mother Rosie, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. George, is there really no other way? I looked at her. The woman who had given birth to me. Strangely, I felt no anger. No disappointment. Just clarity. Mom, I said quietly, when you brought me back there were 3 objectives. First, I would play the role of the obedient son. Second, I would marry into the Liu family. Third, I would help maintain the relationship between the Wang and Liu families. I spread my hands slightly. I completed all 3. But asking the Liu family to bleed heavily just to rescue the Wang family. I shook my head. That job isn't part of my contract. Simon exploded. He jumped to his feet in rage. But before he could move, Willow raised her hand. Several Liu family bodyguards stepped forward instantly, positioning themselves between us. Willow's voice was calm. Please escort them out. That night the Wang family left the villa in humiliation. But the story didn't end there. Within days the internet erupted. Articles flooded social media. Headlines painted me as a cold-blooded traitor. A man who abandoned his own family. Someone who rose to wealth by betraying the people who raised him. At the same time, rumors about Willow's personal life were dragged back into public view. The Wang family clearly wasn't going down quietly. They had even joined forces with Willow's former boyfriend and her former best friend to stir the chaos. For a while the entire internet turned against us. The Liu Group's stock price dropped sharply. Willow's phone rang non-stop. Then one morning I walked into Willow's office at the Liu Group headquarters. She looked exhausted but still composed. When she saw me, she forced a small smile. "Don't worry," she said. "As long as I'm here, this storm won't destroy us." I nodded quietly. Then I handed her a phone. The next day several audio recordings began spreading across the internet. Clear conversations. Cold negotiations. Words that revealed exactly how I had been brought back into the Wang family in the first place. The public reaction changed instantly. Some people still cursed me. But others started asking questions. Gradually the narrative split. Once the conversation became divided, the Liu Group's public relations team stepped in and began carefully guiding the situation. The storm slowly weakened. Those recordings were real. On the very first day I reunited with my family, when I was supposedly checking the bank card balance, I had secretly started recording. At the time it was simply a precaution. I thought if things went wrong one day, at least I would have evidence to protect myself. I never expected those recordings would one day save both my reputation and my life. 3 months later the chaos faded. The Liu Group's stock price recovered. As for the Wang family, they had already declared bankruptcy and entered liquidation. My mother Rosie made a decisive move. She sold the remaining assets and took the family overseas to start again. One evening I walked into the dining room and saw something unexpected. A table full of food. And a large cake in the center. Willow sat at the table wearing a simple home dress, slowly swirling a glass of red wine. "Today is your birthday," she said. "I didn't arrange anything grand. Just dinner at home." I paused. It had been many years since anyone remembered my birthday. I shrugged. "Well, I'll treat it as employee benefits." We ate. We drank. The night grew quieter and warmer. By the time morning arrived, the world outside was the same as always. But something between us had quietly changed. For someone like me, an outsider who had accidentally stepped into the world of wealth. The story wasn't over. In fact, my money-making life had only just begun.